Hannah's Unexpected Fortune. My name is Hannah. I'm 36 years old and work as a high school teacher. Until recently, my life was fairly simple, teaching, raising my daughter, and managing everyday responsibilities. But everything changed when I discovered I might inherit a large sum of money, over $4 million. Before I even had time to process this information, my family started making plans as if the money was already in our hands. My husband, Walter, who is 3 years older than me and works in an office, made a shocking announcement. He told me with excitement that he had quit his job to start his own business, assuming that my inheritance would fund his new venture. At the same time, my mother-in-law was busy designing a duplex where we could all live together. She spoke enthusiastically about the modern kitchen she had always dreamed of having, completely convinced that the inheritance would make it possible. I felt like I was losing control. Everything was happening so fast. Wait a minute, I protested, trying to stop them from getting carried away. I haven't received a single penny yet. Why are you all making such big decisions? But no one seemed to listen. My father-in-law even suggested that we take a family vacation to Florida to celebrate this so-called financial windfall. I was overwhelmed. How could they be so eager to spend money that I hadn't even received yet? A few months earlier, before all this chaos, my life was much quieter. I spent my days balancing work and taking care of my 9-year-old daughter, Samantha. Samantha was my pride and joy. She was bright, full of curiosity, and loved reading. Whenever we visited my mother in the hospital, she would eagerly share stories about school and the latest book she had finished. My mother, despite her frail condition, always smiled warmly at her. One particular visit stood out in my memory. "Grandma, it's been a while," Samantha exclaimed as she rushed to my mother's bedside. A middle-aged man wearing glasses quietly left the room as we entered. I didn't pay him much attention at the time. My mother, her gentle blue eyes filled with warmth, reassured me that she was doing fine. Growing up, my parents had worked hard to provide for me. They had immigrated from another country and built a successful business from the ground up. Thanks to their efforts, I was raised in a stable and loving home, where education and hard work were always emphasized. After my father passed away a few years ago, my mother's health slowly declined. She eventually decided to hand over the family business to a relative and focus on her well-being. During one of my visits, I asked, "Mom, do you need anything?" She smiled and answered, "Just having you and Samantha here is more than enough." That moment warmed my heart. My mother had always been selfless, thinking of others before herself. Meanwhile, at home, Walter was growing increasingly restless. He had recently attended a seminar on starting a business and was eager to find ways to increase our household income. His job, while stable, didn't satisfy him, and he often spoke of wanting more financial freedom. At times, his obsession with money worried me. His parents, in particular, were always looking for ways to save or gain financially. They would frequently ask us for money when they visited, which made our relationship somewhat strained. They weren't the type to spoil Samantha, not even during Christmas, which always disappointed me. Despite these small tensions, our home life was peaceful. Walter was responsible with household chores, and we had built a comfortable life together. A life-changing call. Then, one day, everything changed. I received an urgent call from the hospital. My mother's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Rushing to her side, I barely had time to process what was happening. Her breaths were shallow, and her voice was weak, but she still managed to speak to me. "Hannah," she whispered, "I always wanted you to be happy. Cherish Samantha more than anything. I love you." Those were her last words to me. I held her hand as she passed away, feeling an overwhelming wave of sorrow. At her funeral, Samantha and I wept together. My mother had not only raised me with love but had also shared a special bond with Samantha. Losing her was devastating. A few weeks later, an unexpected envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a law firm. Confused, I opened it and found legal documents inside. According to the papers, I was the sole beneficiary of my mother's will. This was something she had never mentioned to me before. Curious and anxious, I decided to visit the law firm alone. A middle-aged man in glasses greeted me. He introduced himself as Roy, an attorney. "You were in my mother's hospital room," I realized, recognizing him from our last visit. "Yes," he confirmed. Your mother entrusted me with handling her estate. Then he shared something that left me speechless. Your mother left you an inheritance of $6 million. My heart nearly stopped. I had always known my parents were well off, but I never imagined they had this much money. After my father passed away, I had waived my right to his inheritance so my mother could keep everything. Now, all of it was being passed down to me. Roy reassured me, saying, "Your mother cared deeply about you. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude and grief. This inheritance was my mother's final gift to me, a way of ensuring that I wouldn't struggle. On Roy's advice, I secured the money in a deposit box for safekeeping. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but I knew one thing: I needed time to grieve before making any major decisions. The family's obsession with the money. As weeks passed, I noticed that Walter was becoming more interested in the inheritance. At first, he asked casually, "Have you received your mother's money yet?" Still mourning, I wasn't ready to discuss finances, so I brushed off the question. "The legal process takes time," I told him. But he kept bringing it up, his curiosity growing stronger each time. Then, at my mother's 50-day memorial service, his father brought it up too. "Hannah," my father-in-law said, "if you need help managing your inheritance, we have experience with these things." I forced a smile, but deep down, I was uneasy. They had never been interested in truly helping me before. Why now? For months after my mother's passing, Walter's patience finally ran out. He asked me directly, "So, have you gotten the inheritance yet?" Feeling pressured, I lied. "No, the legal process is still ongoing." The truth was, I already had the money secured. But something in my gut told me to keep it to myself. Walter seemed satisfied with my answer. In fact, he seemed happy. Too happy. The next evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner, the doorbell rang. Samantha ran to open it, and I heard familiar voices. My in-laws had arrived, unexpectedly. Walter stood beside them, grinning. My heart sank. Something was wrong. His father pulled a beer from the fridge, looking cheerful. "We have something to celebrate," he announced. My mother-in-law, equally excited, said, "You're inheriting over $4 million, right? We've already started building a duplex for all of us to live in together. It even has my dream kitchen." I froze. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They were making plans with my money they weren't even supposed to know about. And at that moment, I realized, my life was about to get a lot more complicated. Hannah sat at the dining table, her hands clenched into fists, her heart pounded as she looked at Walter, her husband, who was grinning confidently. He had just made a shocking announcement. "I quit my job and decided to start a business using that inheritance," Walter declared. Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. "What? You quit your job, and you're already planning to spend the inheritance?" "Walter, I told you, I haven't received any money yet. We don't even know when or if I'll get it." But Walter wasn't listening. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking completely at ease. Across from him, his mother beamed with excitement. "Oh, Hannah, don't be so cautious. The money is coming, it's just a matter of time." Walter made the right decision. "We've even started designing the new duplex we'll all live in together." Hannah's head spun. "Wait a minute, you're planning to build a house? Why are you all making these big decisions when I haven't received a single penny?" Walter waved a hand dismissively. "We've checked into it. You can't refuse an inheritance. If you don't claim it within 4 months, it's yours whether you process it or not." His words made no sense, but he spoke with such certainty that his parents nodded in agreement. "Considering the size of your father's company, Hannah, you'll probably inherit more than $4 million. We'll all live comfortably. Just be sure to have the money ready for the duplex and Walter's business." Hannah's pulse quickened. She looked at her husband, who had already mapped out their future without her input. Then she looked at his parents, who spoke about her mother's hard-earned money as if it already belonged to them. The pressure, the expectations, the sheer audacity of it all made her want to scream. But Samantha, her 9-year-old daughter, was in the next room. She couldn't risk her overhearing this argument. Swallowing her frustration, she pushed her chair back and stood up. "I need some air," she muttered. But no one paid her any attention. They were too busy talking about their imaginary future. built on money they hadn't even received. Hannah walked out of the house, letting the cool night air hit her face. She needed to get away. To think, she found herself at a nearby park, one she used to visit with her mother. Sitting on a bench, she let the tears fall. Her mother had always been careful with money. She had worked so hard, sacrificing to build a stable life. And now, Walter and his parents were ready to drain it dry before she even had time to grieve. The thought of divorce crossed her mind, but it wasn't that simple. What about Samantha? She couldn't just rip her life apart. Her mother's last words echoed in her mind, "Take care of Samantha above all else." Hannah took a deep breath, wiping her tears. Just then, a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are you okay?" She looked up and saw a stranger, an older man with kind eyes. Normally, she wouldn't open up to someone she didn't know, but tonight, she needed someone to listen, and so, she did. 5 days later, Hannah made her decision. She arranged for a private meeting at a restaurant with Walter and his parents. The moment she sat down, they pounced. "So, you finally came back home. Did you withdraw the money?" Walter asked, barely containing his excitement. His mother scoffed, "You shouldn't leave home without telling your husband." Ignoring their words, Hannah reached into her bag and pulled out a document. She placed it on the table. Walter's eyes narrowed. "What's this?" Hannah's voice was steady. "It's a divorce notice." The room fell silent. Walter's face twisted in disbelief. "What are you saying? I can't do this anymore, Walter. Ever since the inheritance came into the picture, you've completely changed. You quit your job without asking me. You decided we'd all live with your parents without asking me. You planned to build a house with money I haven't even received. You treated my mother's legacy like it was your personal jackpot. I've had enough." Walter's face turned red. "You're leaving me over money? You've changed, Hannah. You're just being selfish." Hannah let out a bitter laugh. "Who's the selfish one? The person protecting what her mother left behind, or the people trying to take it for themselves?" Her father-in-law leaned forward. "Hannah, don't be rash. Our savings are shared property. Half of that inheritance belongs to Walter." His wife nodded. "That's right. If you divorce, we'll take our $4 million and go." Hannah's jaw tightened. Their greed was disgusting. Just as she was about to respond, the door to the private room slid open. Dad, Grandpa, and Grandma should know better. All heads turned as Samantha entered the room, followed by a man in glasses, Attorney Roy. Walter frowned. "And who are you?" Roy stepped forward. "I'm Attorney Roy. Hannah's mother entrusted me with handling her estate. I've been advising Hannah." Walter's face paled slightly. "What does that have to do with anything?" Roy adjusted his glasses. "A lot, actually. First of all, an inheritance from a deceased parent is not considered shared marital property. It belongs solely to Hannah. It cannot be divided in a divorce." Walter's jaw dropped. "That can't be right. That's not fair." Roy remained calm. "It's the law. And there's more. Samantha recorded everything you and your parents said about trying to take Hannah's inheritance. That recording can be used in court." Walter's face turned ghostly white. His parents exchanged panicked glances. "This is ridiculous. You're really divorcing me?" "I'll fight this," Walter growled. "You'll lose," Roy replied simply. "Walter, you quit your job without consulting your wife, attempted to control family finances without her consent, and now Samantha has made it clear she wants to live with her mother. These are strong points in a custody battle." Samantha stepped closer to her father, her small hands clenched at her sides. "Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, all you ever talk about is money. You never even asked me how I feel. I can't stay with people like that. I'm going with Mom." Hannah's heart ached with both pride and sorrow. Samantha had spoken the truth without hesitation, and in that moment, Hannah knew they were finally free. Walter and his parents sat in stunned silence. The greed that had driven them had now left them with nothing. Hannah took Samantha's hand and stood. "We're done here." With that, she walked away, her daughter by her side, ready to start anew.